afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly delighted to be here at the Republic Summit. If you look at the last decade of India's growth, there's been both a great rise in the hard power of India and the soft power of India. During India's G20 presidency, and G20 is important because it accounts for about 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for almost 80% of the global trade. And it accounts for almost 75% of the global population. During India's G20 presidency, not only India did it very differently from the rest of the world. Other countries hold it in one city or two cities at the best. India hosted a G20 in every state and union territory of India and held it in almost 60 cities of India and used that opportunity to transform these cities by improving its drainage, sewage, solid waste. But more important than that, India straddled through the world of G7, all the emerging markets, Russia, China, and bring them all together on all key issues confronting the world. Whether it was strong, sustainable, inclusive, and balanced growth, whether it was accelerating the pace of sustainable development goals in the post-COVID era, whether it was a green development pact for climate action and climate finance, or whether it was reform of the multilateral financial institution, or technological transformation and digital public infrastructure, or women-led development, in all these issues. And there were 83 paras in all. 83 paras. India was able to bring consensus on all these issues for the first time in G20. On all these issues. And more important than that, we were confronted with a very major challenge of an ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, where United Nations had failed. The G20 of India succeeded in bringing consensus on the issue of Russia-Ukraine. This was unparalleled, and this could happen because of India's hard power and soft power built during the last decade, and because of the stature and standing of the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. We could take a lot of risk, we could be gutsy, we could be bold, we could be courageous, largely on account of this leadership. And it's important to dwell a little bit on this, because if you look at the last decade, India has carried out a vast range of structural reforms in its economy. It's brought in GST, one tax across the economy, is brought in a modern bankruptcy law, is brought in the Real Estate Regulation Act to save middle class of India, is brought in the finest corporate tax rates, it's focused on ease of doing business, and scrapped a vast range of rules, regulation, procedures, and processes, and scrapped almost 1,500 laws. The structural reforms were accompanied by digital transformation of India. 1.4 billion digital identities, 550 million bank accounts were opened during 2015-17. When we started opening bank accounts in 2015, only 18% of the women in India had bank accounts. Today, 91% of the women have bank accounts in India. This has not happened anywhere else in the world. And then we linked up both the digital identity and the mobile number, which enabled us to do fast payments. Today, we are the world's #1 in real-time fast payments in the world. We do 46% of the real-time fast payments. Last year, we did 128 billion fast payments in the world. China was second with 26 billion fast payments. That was the difference. From 128 billion India, China 26 billion. And then we had a number of our startups doing cashless, paperless credit, number of young startups doing wealth creation by taking stock market to rural areas, Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, a number of startups giving insurance in 1 minute flat on the basis of your mobile. So fast payments in 30 seconds, wealth creation in 30 seconds, and digital insurance in 1 minute. That has been the transformation of India. And this is all open source, open API. This is globally interoperable. And unlike the rest of the world, where data is monopolized by the big tech, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Amazon in India, and in China by Tencent and Alibaba, in India, the data is owned by the citizens of India. And they give permission which is technically made possible by their consent on the mobile, on the go. So our model during G20 was accepted as the best model in the world. The definition of digital public infrastructure and the framework was accepted. And today we've taken it to 20 countries of the world, and tomorrow we'll take it to the rest of the world. Because 4 billion people of the world do not have a digital identity. 2.5 billion people do not have a bank account. 133 countries in the world do not have fast payments. So India's model will be taken to the rest of the world to transform the world. And that is why during COVID, we could do 2.2 billion COVID vaccination, and we could, instead of giving large packages, we could put money straight into the bank account of these beneficiaries. Whereas in the United States of America, 9 million checks came back, and Germany struggled for 18 months to create digital identities. So ladies and gentlemen, structural reforms, digital identity, and the third was in infrastructure, the push towards infrastructure. Creation of 40 million houses, of 110 million toilets, of 30 million electric connections to households, of 253 million piped water connection, and almost 80,000 kilometers of road. That's been the story of infrastructure creation in India. And that's why the Bank of International Settlement said that what India has achieved in 9 years would have taken India 50 years to achieve in the normal course. Instead of 50 years, we could do it in 9 years. And therefore, this infrastructure creation the government was able to do because it took its spending of capital expenditure for 1%, from 1% in 2014 to 4% till in the last budget. And this shows government's determination to create world-class infrastructure. And the fourth key point is what India has done for climate action and to build a sustainable and a clean India. We have not contributed to greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Our CO2 emission is only 1.3%. Our total emission is 1/10 of the United States of America. But as a responsible nation, India took over the responsibility and created 187 gigawatts of renewable energy. We are the only G20 country to achieve its NDC targets 9 years ahead of schedule, and we've done it at record low prices. We brought down the price of renewable from 21 rupees to less than 2 rupees. In addition to this, we were able to provide over 110 million of our women cooking gas connections so that they need not burn firewood. We could provide 30 million households electric connection. And now we are moving towards green hydrogen so that we can green up all the hard-to-abate sectors of steel, cement, refinery, fertilizer. And instead of being a fossil fuel importing country where we import 180 billion worth of fossil fuel, by the time we become 147, we should be an energy exporting country of exporting green hydrogen or in its liquid form ammonia to the rest of the world. So from an importer of energy to an exporter of energy is our plan. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've achieved in terms of structural reforms, in terms of digital identity, in terms of climate action, and all these have been done with speed. And the focus has constantly been on implementation, implementation, and implementation. So this has enabled us to build our hard power and our soft power. And ladies and gentlemen, it's important that as India accelerates the pace of its growth in its Amrit Kal period and accelerates it to the growth of 8 to 9%, because India is the only country which is growing at 8% plus in the last 3 quarters of its economy, and as it accelerates the pace on the basis of these transformations, India is heading to be the 3rd largest economy in the world in the next 5 years, surpassing Japan and Germany, and will be a $35 trillion economy by the time it becomes 147. And that would mean that if we would have raised the per capita income of every single individual from $2,500 to close to $18,000 per citizen, and the quality of life of every citizen would have improved. And therefore, my belief is that in a globalized economy, it's the economic growth which gives you the hard power, and it's your belief in your civilizational strength, which we embodied in G20. We did not copy the rest of the world. We did not copy the West, but we went back to our civilization, the roots of our civilization, to say that we are Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, that we are one earth, one family, one future. We may have different political ideologies. We may have political differences. We may have geographical differences, but we all come from one cosmos. And therefore, on account of this philosophy, this ideology, and this civilizational ethos, we could achieve consensus on all complex issues confronting the world. And ladies and gentlemen, as we aggressively push for growth, as we aggressively push for reforms, as we aggressively push for digitization, as we aggressively push for infrastructure creation, and as we could push for sustainable growth because of climate action and climate finance, India will be in the forefront. And therefore, we will have the responsibility of leading the world. It's important to realize that in the global GDP today, if you look at the global GDP, America's share of the global GDP has remained constant at about 25% in the last 2.5 decades. Europe's share, and it's important to understand this, Europe's share has come down from 30% to 15% and will come down even further. In the last 3 decades, due to China's acceleration of pace of growth, its share had grown from 3% to close to 18%. But China's growth has now slowed down and India's growth has accelerated, and therefore India's share will now grow from 3.5% in the coming till 2047, it will accelerate to close to 20% of the global GDP. And therefore, in the years to come, India will be providing 30% of the skilled manpower to the rest of the world. By the time we get into our Amrit Kal period, imagine all your electricians, your plumbers, your carpenters, your hospitality managers which were trained in Lausanne, in Switzerland, will be all trained in India, and they will be running all the top hotels of the world. So the Indians will be skilled for the rest of the world. And the challenges of India will be to do very, very smart urbanization to improve our learning and health outcomes, to ensure that our agriculture productivity rises so that we can continue to accelerate the pace of our growth. So as many people have commented, this is not merely India's decade, this is India's century. And it is incumbent upon each one of us to ensure that as disciplined Indians, we ensure that we accelerate the pace of our growth, we become responsible citizens, and we ensure that India continues to grow and accelerate its pace of growth in all these aspects of structural reforms, digitization, sustainable growth, and infrastructure creation. The important challenge is that the center has done its bit. It's now for the states to accelerate reforms in all these areas. Now the responsibility for the next decade will be on many of our states. If our states start growing at rapid rates of 10% plus, India will grow at 11% plus. And therefore, it's not merely that the western part of India or the southern part of India accelerates its pace of growth, but the northern, the eastern, the central part, the southern, the western, all India must grow. And it's important that all these structural reforms which have been carried out by the center, the next phase is carried out by the states of India. They become the agents of change, and they become the key drivers of growth. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely convinced that this is not merely India's decade, this is India's century, and it's for all of us to work together to accelerate the pace of our growth during the Amrit Kal period. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.